Now, can you all hear me? Please raise your hands.
Tá, tene xem lìa. Xem lìa tene.
Next, I would like to speak about is the way that the mind-only thoughts spreads to China. Having spoken about how it speaks to India and India, so now I'd like to speak in general about the spread of mind-only to China. So the past several days, I've mentioned the names of many Japanese, well-known Japanese scholars who research the mind only. And so you may well think that there are quite a few experts in the mind only in Japan. Well, then, how did the mind only school that flourishes in Japan, did it come directly from India? No, it did not. The Japanese mind-only tradition is called the Hososhu. And in Chinese, it's what we call the Fa Shang Cong, or if you translate into English, would be the Dharma Characteristic School. The Japanese mind-only tradition spread to Japan from China. And so, first of all, we need to speak about how the mind-only spread in China and the developments and changes that occurred there. Only then can we understand how the mind-only spread to Japan. So next, I would like to speak about the spread of the mind only to China in brief. Now, I can't explain it in full, but I can give a bit of an introduction. And then tomorrow, continue us into speaking about the spread of the teachings in China. And at the same time, and I'll begin to introduce the spread of the teachings to Japan. And perhaps I shall also speak about Korea. Now, these days we call it Korea, but in the old days, there are many different names used for Korea. One of these is Shinlo. There's a time period was called the Shinlo. And there was another name at different periods. During the time of the Shinlo, I thought I should give an introduction to how the mind only spread to the Korea in that time. And then after that, I would like to speak a bit about how the teachings and sutras of the mind only spread to Tibet. Now, when you think about the mind-only school or the mind-only philosophy that has spread to China, we can divide it into three different traditions. And one is the 10 levels tradition, the Mahayana compendium tradition, and the Dharma characteristics tradition. So these are the three. So next, I'd like to speak about how these three traditions spread and explain a bit about their positions. Now, in general, if we think about we need to have an introduction to how the mind only texts themselves were introduced to China. Now, in the 5th century or so, it's either the Buddha nature school or the mind only school was first introduced to China. Now, this was introduced by a master called Dhammarakcha, who lived from around 385 to 433 and translated the Busa Di Chi Ching. This is basically the Bodhisattva level. This is one of the different translations of the Bodhisattva levels. And so once it arrived to China, we immediately know what year it happened. It's very clearly indicated. Now, the Indian history, we don't know anything at all. We can just sort of make any sort of general, but we can't know anything precisely. But in China, when the Indian masters came to China, then we know the year, the month, and the day of the month very clearly. And there's also a master called Gunavardhana who came to, and then also he translated another version of the sutra of the discipline of a bodhisattva. And this is also the bodhisattvas. So if you ask, are these the first mind-only texts that were translated into Chinese? I think there's probably nothing wrong with saying that. Likewise, there's also a master named Gunabhadra. He was an Indian master who went to China. And from 394 to 460, he translated the Srimala Sutra, the Lion's Roar, the Travels to Lanka Sutra, and the Sutra of the Stream of Liberation. This Sutra of the Stream of Liberation is primarily the same as the content of the last 2 chapters, the Sutra Unraveling the Intent. So in brief, in the 4th century, in the 4th and 5th centuries, around the 5th century, in the 4th and 5th centuries, the texts of the mind-only school were introduced to China. Now, during the time of the northern and southern dynasties, now this is a dynastic period in China. So this is a Chinese dynasty, but within this dynasty, now at that time, there's the Wei Zhangma. There's the king of Wei Zhangma, and and so the first year of the Wei Gong, in the 508, when this emperor took the throne, then the Indian masters Bodhiruchi, Ratnabhadra, and Buddhashanti were invited, they arrived in China. Now, at that time, the Emperor Wu, at the request of Emperor Wu, they translated Vasubandhu's commentary on the Sutra of the 10 Levels, also the differentiating the family of the jewels, or what we call in Tibetan or in English, the Sublime Continuum, and also they translated the Compendium of the Mahayana. Wait 1 moment, please. There's something I need to change here.
군적으로 남바리야 NTD에서 디주
And so they translated the differentiating the family of the jewels and the compendium of Mahayana. So this is the introduction of the works of Asanga and of Vasubandha to China. There was also the masters Bodhiruchi. So, excuse me. So before there was Bodhiruchi, who was just as the Gunabhadra had done before. He also did a new translation of the Travels to Lanka and the Sutra of Profound Liberation, which is the one that is similar to the Sutra Unraveling the Intent. So he retranslated these. So in brief, there are at least two translations of the commentary on the Sutra of the 10 Levels by Vasubandha. So the translations by Bodhiruchi and Ratnamati. It's possible that there are two. But the former, the one by Bodhiruchi, became very well known. And for this reason, later the translation by Ratnamati is probably no longer extant. Now, the commentary on the 10 Levels is in one respect a commentary on the sutra. It's an explanation of a sutra. But in particular, it speaks about how there is an all-ground or ground consciousness. So at that time, within the northern Chinese Buddhist circles, there was a great scramble to investigate and study this text. People were like really rushing to study and investigate it. And because of this, it became, we got all the school of the proponents of the 10 Levels, or the 10 Level schools. In brief, a tradition that taught a tradition that matched the commentary of the 10 Levels, so it was called the 10 Level School. Now, if you look at what is the reason why there is such a great spread of study and research into this commentary on the 10 Levels, so what were the reason for this? There's a modern Japanese scholar whose name is Ocho Enichi. So Ocho Enichi said, he explained this in terms of three different reasons. Now, what these three reasons are is, first, the commentary on the 10 Level Sutra is a text that teaches how to practice the path to enlightenment. It teaches practice. And so for that time, in the northern Chinese tradition, they primarily emphasized practice. The northern Buddhists primarily focused on practice, and so that was their inclination. And so the commentary on the Sutra of the 10 Levels essentially primarily teaches practice and meditation. So it really was it fit very well with the inclinations or the habits of the northern Chinese. Now, the second reason is it is a commentary on the Buddha's words. And because it's a commentary on the words of the Buddha, it's not the own opinions and conclusions of the author of the treatise. It's the words of the Buddha. And so people could have a special confidence. If you think this is my opinion, then people aren't going to really believe you. If you say this is an explanation of the words of the Buddha, then people will have even greater confidence in it. So that's another reason why it spread so widely. Now, a third reason is that this commentary represented the mind-only school that was newly spreading into China. It was not very long since the mind-only had arrived in China. And so this commentary in the 10 Level Sutra introduced this mind-only view. And it pointed all the crucial points of the Buddhist view and practice in a systematic manner. And so the people would look and say, this is what you do in the practice, and it has it in an order and a systematic fashion. And so people found this really attractive. And so many people, for that reason, took great interest in this commentary on the Sutra of the Ten Levels. Now, later in the 10 levels tradition, there were two different traditions. These two traditions were, the first of these is called the Dao Chung. There's a level from Dao Chung, and this tradition is called the Bei Dao. The Bei Dao means the northern way or the northern tradition. Now the second came from the master Hui Guang, and this is the southern tradition that comes from this master. Now, if we talk about it in terms of their positions, the difference is that in the northern tradition, they assumed that the all-ground consciousness was stained, and it was a thought by nature. The Nandao, the southern way, assumed that the all-ground was stainless and pure wisdom by nature. Similarly, the northern school, that all phenomena arise from the all-ground. That means, and for that reason, they're called those. Say that or propone that they're supported by the all-ground. Whereas the southern tradition said that all phenomena arise from the Dharma nature suchness. So they're said to, or that they're supported by suchness. And so because of the way their positions and their assertions diverged, and so they had a really fierce dispute, and they had very hot refutations of each other, very fierce refutations of each other. Now, sometimes when you're doing refutations, it's actually good, because when you make a refutation, then it becomes even more pure. You can really examine logically, and to eliminate your misconceptions and your misunderstandings. For example, current researchers these days primarily examine the conclusions of earlier scholars and see, are these actually in accord with the nature of things? And they have a lot of refutations of each other. And in Tibet, in the old days, the different schools would make refutations of each other. And this happened frequently. But in the Tibetans, what happened when you talk about making refutations? There's one bad tradition is that they use really derogatory words. They really malign the others and speak badly of them. And in the one that this is identified as a way of showing their own scholastic qualities, but actually these words are misunderstood by many people. And many people, and other people, I think, they're really maligning us and they're insulting us. And so they understand it improperly. And so for that reason, there have been many, there's a danger that there develops a lot of disharmony and conflict between the different schools. But if we speak instead of using derogatory language, if we use logicals as a way to help each other and to benefit each other, if we do refutations in that manner, then that is actually very beneficial for helping us develop and improve our philosophical positions. But our Tibetan tradition is really standing around. We're talking about making an education. Then we're saying that the other person is completely evil, and say that everything that he says are mistaken or confused. And this is a mistaken way of doing it. In the world, no matter who the person is, it's hard to find anyone who has eliminated all their faults and developed other qualities. We give the example of the Buddha Bhagavan as someone who's eliminated all the faults and developed all the qualities, but there are people who saw faults in him. And so from that time, if we're regular human beings, it's difficult to find anyone who has no qualities and has all the qualities. And so as we're digging out all of the faults and only looking for those and criticizing them, then there's no point in making refutations like that. This isn't anything that is going to improve the philosophy. It has no benefit for developing new understanding. So this is important for us to understand. To speak about it in general terms, logically refuting each other and having discussion is really extremely beneficial for improving our philosophy. I sometimes think this. There is a Tsongkhapa either developed or invented many new presentations of the middle way and so forth, or had different thought than many previous masters. Because of this, many Tibetan masters have refuted him. Because of that, then these disciples responded to these. And from the one perspective, it's that the teachings of Je Tsongkhapa or the Gelugpa Chizit is probably very beneficial because all these refutations by the other schools definitely had a benefit for helping the teachings of the disciples of Je Tsongkhapa and the Gelugpa school become very, very helpful. And I think that it definitely must have been very beneficial to the other schools as well. But this is just my opinion. So in brief, to speak about the spread of the mind only in China at that time, if we look in terms of the religious and social conditions of the time, the southern tradition became more influential. And the reason is that their founder was Huigong, which if we could translate, it would mean the light of Prajna. Now, Huigong was like the crown jewel of all the scholars in southern China. And the government had also pointed to a position of responsibility in the Sangha. So there's a tradition of being given, so you had a very high rank in the Sangha. So in terms of both religious and political masters, a very influential person. He also, in particular, studied the Vinaya with Buddha Shanti, an Indian master named Buddha Shanti, and became very known as a great holder of the Vinaya. He was called the Guangtong holder of Vajra. And so in China, there is a Sifan Luzong Vinaya lineage, right? This is a Vinaya school, right? And so he's like the founder of this lineage. And he also really studied in full the meaning of the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Sutra of Mahaparinibbana, the teachings of Avalokiteshvara, the 10 levels in the Bodhisattva. It's like he had mastered them and had an extremely vast understanding. And he had many great learned students, including the well-known ones included Fa Shang, Seng Fan, and Dao Ping. And so these are considered to be among his more important students. So in brief, among this southern tradition, there were a lot of scholars. Those are various very influential, and both politically and religiously during the Wei and Qi dynasty. So if we compare the northern way to that, the northern tradition was like they're more focused on practice and meditation. They primarily emphasized practice and meditation. And within that tradition, there were some masters named Seng Shu, Fa Ji, and Da Li. There are many such great scholars in this tradition. Among them, there was the founder of the northern tradition. The forefather of the tradition was Dao Chong. And he spent 3 years studying the commentary on the subject level with the master Bodhicitta. And so he taught to many people, and it says that among those that there were several thousand people. So basically, there were 1,000, not several thousand. There were about 1,000 people who achieved liberation by listening to his teachings on it. However, not long afterward, the northern tradition declined. And then at that time, there's also a compendium of Mahayana tradition that happened. And so this northern tradition became incorporated into that. Now, the southern tradition, what happened with that is that they continued to be the primarily upholders of the 10 levels tradition, right? The northern tradition had declined. And so the southern tradition became the primary upholders of the tradition. And so for the 6 dynasties until the Sui dynasty, it really flourished very broadly. Now, at the end of the Sui dynasty and at the beginning of the Tang dynasty, the southern tradition became incorporated into either the compendium school or the Avatamsaka school. So you can say that it declined and that it's no longer. So that's a brief history of the origins of the 10 level school. Now, the second of these 3 schools, the third is the compendium school. Now, this compendium school is that in China there are 4 great translators. So they're 4 great translators, Chinese translators who translated the words in Sanskrit into Chinese. And who they are, our first of these was one called Kumarashiva. And he was not Chinese. He was probably, it's in the area of present day of Xinjiang, an area that we used to call Li, that in Tibetan used to be called Li. And so Paramartha, he was also not Chinese. He was an Indian master. And the one who was Chinese is Xuanzang. So he was actually Chinese. And then the fourth one was Amoghavadra. And so Amoghavadra, so Amoghavadra was also not Chinese. He actually came from Sri Lanka. So these 4 are called the 4 great Chinese translators. Now, some people also add the master Yi Jing among the ranks of great translators. So there are different ways that you can count them. But anyways, there are one of these 4 great translators was Paramartha. So Paramartha was an Indian master, was in Chinese. And on the instructions of Liang Wuti, the emperor, he went in 548. He went to the city that was the capital at that time, Jianye. And when he got there, then at that there was a great war in China, and because of that, then Paramartha was unable to stay in just one place. He went to all sorts of different places, fleeing to various places. And when he was fleeing, as the side of fleeing, he also translated many sutras and treatises. And so what he translated include the Vajrasplitter, the Light of Gold Sutra, and many other sutras. In terms of treatises, he translated the Differentiating the Middle from Extremes, the Teachings on the 3 Lacks of Characteristics, and many other mind-only treatises. And he primarily, in order for there to be the study and the study and propagation of the treasure of Abhidharma, the compendium of the Mahayana, he worked very hard at that. And he said that he did what he could to teach them 100 times. So according to the continued biographies of eminent monks, so according to those continued biographies of eminent monks, what it says is, the one named Truth went to the east and translated vast scriptures, but the main one was the compendium of the Mahayana. And so the main point here is that, so the one named Truth, or Master Paramartha, once he arrived in China, he translated many scriptures. The primary one, the most important one, was the Cambodian. He primarily translated the mind-only texts. So that is what is written there. And so for that reason, most of the sutras and treatises he translated are primarily mind-only treatises. In particular, after he translated Asanga's Compendium of Mahayana, then only then was there like a spread of a complete framework of the mind-only philosophy in China. At that point, up to that point, there had been like only the commentary in the 10-level sutra, but there wasn't actually a complete presentation of the mind-only's own tenets. And because of his translation of the Compendium of Mahayana, you could say that there's like an entire systematized framework of the Mahayana in China, of the mind only in China. So from that point, those who followed him and followed his teachings, what they're called, is called the School of the Compendium, or the Compendium School. So this is another tradition that appeared. Now, Paramattha had many students, and so among them are Hui Kai and Fa Tai and Seng Zong, one named Fa Ren, one named Tao Nin and Cao Pi, and another one called Zhi Jiao. So he had many different students. Among them, the one named Hui Kai was his closest student, the one he was happiest. And Hui Kai was actually really an expert in the treasury of Abhidharma. And he was unrivaled in teaching the treasury of Abhidharma. But one thing that's unfortunate is that he passed away before Paramattha. And because of that, the Master Paramattha was extremely disappointed and extremely grief-stricken. And he had his various students, including the one called Tao Ni and Zhi Jiao and others. And he brought them all together. He brought to the place where the remains of Hui Kai were, and he made them take an oath. We are going to propagate the teachings of the compendium and the treasury. Now, among them, there was Dao Ni, who was his attendant until Paramattha passed away. And he then worked very hard to propagate the teachings of the compendium. Later on the order of the emperor, he went to the capital of Chang'an and stayed at Daxingshan Temple, where he spread the teachings widely. Now, at that time in northern China, there was a situation where the Buddhism was wiped out of northern China, similar to when Langdamma wiped out the teachings from Tibet. So this happened a couple times in China. So at that time, there was the situation where in northern China. So in Chaozhang, that was in 574. And in Xijiangma, the teachings were wiped out in 577. And so because of this, many of the scholars from the northern China fled to the south. Now, it wasn't as easy to travel in the old days as it is today. If you need to go from one place to another in the old days, it was very hard. It was very far. So normally, the southern and the northern scholars didn't have much connection. But when the teachings were wiped out in the north, the northern masters all fled as refugees to the south. And when they arrived there, they made a connection with the Compendium of Mahayana. So in the previous, it had in the South India, there's a great tradition of studying the Mahayana in the south. But so in the northern, so they made a connection with the tradition, they studied it, and then later when they returned to the north, they propagated the work in the north of China. It also spread very widely there. Now the compendium tradition that flourished in the north had distinguishing qualities, and what they are. So the first is that the Algrand has both impure and pure parts. It has both obscured and unobscured phases, you could say. So you said that basically like there's a common basis of the pure and pure and the all ground. And the second point is that then there, in addition to the consciousness, there's a ninth consciousness called the pure consciousness. So in addition to the eighth consciousness, there's a ninth consciousness, which is called the Amala or the unstained consciousness. So Amala means unstained, and Vijnana means consciousness. So this is the, they said there's a ninth consciousness. So they said there are nine consciousnesses. Now, for a time, this tradition spread very widely in northern China, but later on, during the Tang Dhammic, when the Dharmalite schools began to spread very widely, this tradition also began to gradually decline and eventually disappeared. So that is a brief introduction to the spread of the compendium tradition. Now, I'll give an introduction to the Dharma Characteristics School tomorrow. I think it's okay to speak about that tomorrow. Now, as I was mentioning, these days in the world, we have the two traditions that uphold the Mahayana, the Tibetan tradition and the Chinese tradition. And the Chinese tradition and the northern tradition. So the northern tradition is there's the Chinese and the Tibetan, and the Chinese, and that also includes the Korean and the Japanese traditions. And so within this northern tradition, there are the traditions of both the mind only and the middle way. So they both uphold these traditions, and among them, but in the Tibetan tradition, the mind only school never developed into its own self-standing school. And in terms of the philosophical, when we talk about the philosophical schools, we talk about the mind-only tenets, and we talk about the ornament of clear realization. We speak about this. But there was really no one who ever instituted an autonomous mind-only school. But in the Chinese tradition, there are still masters who uphold the mind-only tradition. So we need to learn from them and gain some knowledge of what the mind-only school is like. I think this is very important. Otherwise, sometimes we're like the frog in the well. When you're talking about the frog in the well, when the frog is in the well, since it's never been anywhere else, and thinks there can't be anything bigger than this. And this well is the biggest thing there could be. There can't be anything larger than this. Now, so one day, the frog in the well, if they were actually to see the ocean, there's danger that they'd have a heart attack and die. And the reason for that is he'd never seen anything so huge. He'd always thought that the largest thing there could be was a well. If when he sees something huger than that, it's like it is they're inconceivable. It doesn't fit in his mind. It's like there's a danger he'd have a heart attack. So with this the saying, right? So like that, we know only our own traditional situation. We don't know about other situations. And sometimes what happens, sometimes there's just some sort of good coincidence and chance. When other people say that, there's this and this and other traditions, and then when you think, what is that? Yeah, really? Then later when we learn about it, we start getting a little jealous of it. And then sometimes, if it doesn't work well, then we can't get our minds around it. And even if we don't have a heart attack, our brain will fall apart. So from the very beginning, we definitely, how do we say it? Must not be closed-minded. We need to do whatever we can to have like a wider perspective, looks into and see and learn as many things as we can, gain as much knowledge as we can. None of us also do. We often say that there is nothing that's said that is taught in the teachings of the Buddhas. We say this, and we talk that the five sciences and so forth. But it actually comes to a situation where we don't do this, do we? When there is something new to learn, if there's a new view, a new opinion, we immediately refute it. We say, you're mistaken, you're confused. That's not tenable, that's illogical. And we give many reasons. And we unilaterally, categorically refute it and toss it away. And so we see it in this way. And because of this is so one other way in that we're kind of left behind. If we continue like that, then it'd be difficult for us to improve. So if we need to improve, for a situation to an even better spot, we immediately have to open our minds. We have to have some confidence and take a broader view and understanding. And particularly, if we need to study the scriptures in the other languages, then the other thing, the first thing that's really important is we need to study the language. And the language is very important. And the languages in our Himalayan tradition, there are many people in the Himalayan regions. There are a lot of, in India and so forth, there, Nepal and Bhutan. There are people who can say, a little bit of broken English. They say, okay, hello, and they can talk about food and drink and so forth. But just being able to speak about food and drink doesn't help you when you're studying philosophy. So we need to take some interest in language. When Tibetans first were served as when we first arrived as refugees, in order to preserve our own language, we kind of objected to people studying other languages. When the 16th Karmapa was in Rumtek, the 16th Karmapa didn't particularly like it when other people liked English. If we think about it, it's just his. If we think about it, we have to think about what is your aim for studying a language? Are you really going to study? Is your aim to study the texts of other Buddhist schools and other languages? If you're studying a language for that reason, then that is something that actually should be delighted in, and we should celebrate. But if your aim is not very stable, and you think of this thing because you're not sure, then maybe in the future you can go abroad and do something to benefit beings, you say, and get a few red envelopes. If that's your thought when you're achieving when you're studying language, there's not much point to that, because we only have a few decades in this life, and it takes a long time to study a language. And if you're spending all that time and doing a lot of effort, if you're not doing it for a great purpose and great reason, you're wasting your time. So for that reason, it's really important for us to study languages, in particular with the Buddhist Dharma. If we want to study Buddhism, we need to know several languages. We need to know Chinese, we need to know Sanskrit, Pali, and we need to know Tibetan. That's how it is, isn't it? And there's a reason for this. Now, I'm speaking about the Japanese scholars I've mentioned the other day, as well as the European and the American scholars. Most of them, of course, they speak English. They speak Pali and Sanskrit. They even know a bit of Tibetan. And so when they're doing research, they're looking at the original manuscript. They're looking at what is written in the Sanskrit manuscript itself. And what we do is we read everything and mispronounce it, but actually because there's actually a transition about how to read mantras, but we don't look at those. If you're a kampa, then you do it with a kampa accent. If you're an abdu, you do it with an abdu accent. And if you do from recite it, if you're from Central Tibetan, you read it with a Central Tibetan accent, then our mantras all become. Of course, we could study it, but if we think about forget about the mantra itself, we aren't even able to recite mantras with the proper pronunciation. And so we absolutely must. In these days, when the facilities are much better than they were in the past, when the translators of the past didn't have like dictionaries like we do today, they couldn't search in Google. They didn't have any such easy technology, but they worked hard. They were determined to translate many different translations. And it's important for us to study them. They disregarded their body and life and went to India. They spent gold and silver and their wealth without any reserve. And they translated mountains of scriptures from. When you think of it, this is just absolutely amazing. This is something that we should have a lot of faith for. And we need to learn a lesson from them. And we need to see if we can have that resolve and that motivation. Can we develop that ourselves? This we need to see, can we? Otherwise, sometimes we think to ourselves, oh, they're great beings, inconceivable. It's like they came from the heavens to the earth. And we're just ordinary people who've been born from the through. So there's no way we could possibly do that. So from the very beginning, we are completely discouraged from the beginning, and we remain in self-deprecation and deprecating laziness. Because as we go gradually to improve, it's not like you're Buddha from the beginning, right? No one's Buddha from the beginning. So for this reason, it's important for all of us to keep this in mind. Now, I said many things may well have no point, but at any rate. So now we will recite the dedication prayers.
Ja Recording stopped.